The satellite imagery looked like something from a disaster movie. Superstorm Melissa, a swirling colossus of atmospheric rage spanning 450 miles across, churned through the Caribbean with winds that could strip paint off steel. Maximum sustained winds, 180 miles per hour. Central pressure, 887 millibars, making it one of the most intense Atlantic hurricanes ever recorded. The eye alone measured 12 miles in diameter, surrounded by a stadium of thunderstorms reaching 55,000 feet into the stratosphere. But 230 nautical miles northeast of the Venezuelan coast, aboard the guided missile destroyer USS Arleigh Burke, Commander Patricia Walsh wasn't just watching a hurricane. She was watching Venezuela position its entire coastal defense network in a way that made zero tactical sense, unless they were planning something absolutely insane. At 0347 hours, when Venezuelan radar installations suddenly went active, painting the U.S. carrier strike group with targeting signals, while Melissa's outer bands began hammering the fleet with 70-knot winds and zero visibility, Walsh understood with cold certainty. Venezuela wasn't running from the storm. They were using it as cover for the most audacious challenge to American naval power in decades. What happened in the next 8 hours would rewrite every assumption about asymmetric warfare and prove that sometimes the smallest nations can teach superpowers lessons written in lightning and chaos. Melissa, nature's perfect weapon. Superstorm Melissa wasn't just big, she was biblically destructive. Born from a tropical wave off Cape Verde on October 8th, she had undergone rapid intensification that shocked meteorologists. Within 36 hours, Melissa exploded from a tropical depression to a Category 5 hurricane, her barometric pressure plummeting 72 millibars in a single day, a rate of strengthening rarely observed outside the Western Pacific. By October 14th, when she entered the Caribbean basin, Melissa's statistics were nightmare fuel for anyone at sea. Wind speeds topped 180 miles per hour, with gusts measured by Hurricane Hunter aircraft at 223 miles per hour. The pressure dropped to 887 millibars, lower than Hurricane Gilbert's 888 millibars in 1988. Her wind field extended 105 miles from the center, with hurricane-force winds reaching out 65 miles in all directions. She was moving northwest at 16 knots, pulling behind her a train of destruction that turned the ocean surface into a boiling cauldron. Wave heights in Melissa's northeast quadrant, the most dangerous sector of any northern hemisphere hurricane, exceeded 52 feet, with individual rogue waves potentially reaching 70 feet or higher. The storm surge forecast for any landfall was catastrophic: 22 to 28 feet of water capable of obliterating coastal communities. Rainfall rates exceeded 6 inches per hour in the eye wall, reducing visibility to zero and creating conditions that overwhelmed even military-grade radar systems. But Melissa possessed something even more valuable than raw destructive power: unpredictability. Computer models disagreed wildly on her track. The European model predicted a sharp turn north. The American GFS model showed continued northwest movement toward Jamaica. The Canadian model split the difference. Melissa herself seemed to delight in proving them all wrong, wobbling and lurching in ways that defied atmospheric physics. She would slow down to 8 knots, then suddenly accelerate to 22 knots. Her eye would contract to 8 miles, then expand to 15 miles hours later. For the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, operating in the Caribbean on a routine freedom of navigation patrol, Melissa represented an existential threat. The carrier, its 4 escort destroyers, 2 cruisers, and support vessels needed to maintain safe distance while continuing their mission of monitoring Venezuelan military activities. Standard doctrine called for withdrawing at least 500 nautical miles from any Category 5 hurricane's projected track. But Venezuela's leadership saw Melissa differently. They saw an equalizer, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to challenge American naval supremacy not with superior technology, but with superior timing and tactical audacity.
The Gambit. Admiral Carlos Mendoza stood in the underground Strategic Defense Operations Center outside Caracas, studying the holographic display that showed Melissa's projected track converging with the Lincoln carrier group's anticipated withdrawal route. His staff had been modeling scenarios for 96 hours straight, and the conclusion was audacious to the point of madness. American carriers fleeing hurricanes followed predictable patterns. They withdrew perpendicular to the storm track at maximum sustained speed, typically 30 knots for a carrier group. The Lincoln group would sail northeast, putting distance between themselves and both the storm and Venezuelan coast. Standard procedure, textbook decision-making that had protected U.S. carriers through decades of hurricane seasons. But Mendoza had identified a critical window. For approximately 6 hours, the carrier group's withdrawal route would take them through Melissa's northern outer rain bands. During that period, the fleet would be operating inside conditions that degraded every advantage American technology provided. Aegis radar systems, magnificent in clear weather, become nearly blind in heavy precipitation. The SPY-1D radar arrays that track targets at 200-mile range suffer massive degradation when operating through torrential rain and chaotic seas. What radar operators call sea clutter, false returns from wave crests, rain cells, and atmospheric turbulence, overwhelms the system. Target detection probability drops from 98% to as low as 25%. Tracking multiple small, fast-moving targets becomes nearly impossible. The carrier's air wing would be grounded. No aircraft can operate safely with 80-knot crosswinds and zero visibility. The FA-18s providing combat air patrol would be secured in the hangar deck. The E-2 Hawkeyes providing early warning would be chained down. The carrier's defensive umbrella would collapse to just its escort vessels and their onboard weapon systems. Communications would degrade. High-frequency radio becomes unreliable in severe weather. Satellite communications experience interruptions. The coordination and information sharing that makes American carrier groups so lethal would be compromised. Most critically, the storm itself would provide concealment. Launching missiles during the chaos of a Category 5 hurricane meant the launches might not be detected until the missiles were already in flight. And once launched, the missiles would be flying through the same weather that blinded American sensors. A double-edged sword, but one that favored the attacker if timed perfectly. Mendoza wasn't planning to sink the carrier. That was fantasy. But he didn't need to sink it. He needed to damage it, to prove that even American supercarriers were vulnerable, to demonstrate that Venezuela, written off as a failed state, could still punch back. The political impact of even minor damage to a U.S. carrier would be seismic, a propaganda victory worth more than any military objective. At 04:15 hours on October 15th, President Maduro gave the authorization. Venezuela would challenge the fleet. The challenge begins. The Lincoln Carrier Strike Group had been tracking Melissa with increasing concern. Captain Michael Torres, commanding the carrier, had already secured the flight deck and begun storm preparations. The group's escorts, destroyers USS Arleigh Burke, USS Jason Dunham, cruisers USS Monterey and USS Vicksburg, had extended their screening positions to maximum safe separation while maintaining defensive coverage. At 0512 hours, the first indication of trouble came from the Signals Intelligence Station aboard USS Monterey. Venezuelan fire control radars suddenly went active, multiple installations lighting up along the coast. Senior Chief Ramirez, monitoring the electronic warfare console, saw the telltale signatures of Bastion P targeting radars painting the carrier group. Missile warning, multiple fire control radars active, bearing 192 degrees, Ramirez's voice cut through the Combat Information Center. Venezuelan coastal batteries are going hot. Captain Susan Park, commanding Monterey, didn't hesitate. Sound general quarters, all weapons free, launch alert aircraft. She stopped. There were no aircraft to launch. The carrier was buttoned up tight against Melissa's approaching fury. "Get me the carrier, now!" At 0519 hours, the first Venezuelan missiles launched, not from a single battery, but from 4 separate locations spread across 90 miles of coastline. 12 Klub missiles punched into the turbulent sky, their solid rocket boosters leaving trails that were immediately swallowed by low clouds and rain. Seconds later, 8 C-8002 missiles followed from different positions. The final wave consisted of 6 P-15 Termit missiles, ancient, slow, but carrying massive warheads. 26 missiles were now airborne, converging on the carrier group from multiple axes of attack. But Venezuela had added one more element to their challenge. They broadcast their attack on military frequencies. "American fleet, this is Venezuelan Coastal Defense Command. You are operating in proximity to our territorial waters during a humanitarian crisis. We are conducting defensive exercises. Recommend you withdraw immediately to avoid any misunderstandings." It was a legal fiction so thin it was transparent, but it gave Venezuela plausible deniability. They weren't attacking, they were conducting exercises. That the exercises happened to send live missiles toward the U.S. fleet was just an unfortunate coincidence. The broadcast would be analyzed by international lawyers for years. Storm warfare. The Lincoln Strike Group exploded in defensive action. Aegis systems aboard all 4 escort vessels went into automatic engagement mode, beginning to generate firing solutions before human operators even finished processing the threat. The problem was immediately obvious. The radar picture was a disaster. Lieutenant Jennifer Harmon, tactical action officer aboard USS Arleigh Burke, stared at a display that looked like someone had spilled salt on a green screen. Hundreds of returns, most of them false, cluttered the picture. Rain cells appeared as solid objects. Wave crests generated ghost tracks. Lightning strikes created bright blooms that looked like missile launches. "I count 20-plus inbound tracks, but confidence is low," Harmon reported to her commanding officer. "Multiple false returns. Sea state is degrading tracking quality. Classify all unknown tracks as hostile. Weapons free. Engage at maximum range." At 0532 hours, USS Monterey fired the first defensive salvo. 4 SM-2 Block-3B missiles streaking from the forward vertical launch system toward the threat sector. The missiles, each costing $2.4 million, climbed to 20,000 feet before tipping over into their terminal dive, active radar seekers hunting for targets. 2 missiles acquired Venezuelan Termit missiles and destroyed them in spectacular fireballs, visible even through the rain. 1 missile chased a Phantom and self-destructed after losing track. The 4th missile's seeker was confused by sea clutter and also self-destructed. The Klub missiles, flying at 50 feet above the churning waves, were nearly invisible. Their cruise profiles kept them beneath the radar horizon, and the storm's interference masked their already small radar signatures. They appeared on defensive radars as fleeting contacts, there for one sweep, gone the next, then reappearing 10 miles closer. USS Vicksburg fired a spread of SM-6 missiles, newer weapons capable of engaging threats beyond the radar horizon using data from other sensors and even satellite communications. 3 Klub missiles died, torn apart by proximity-fused warheads that peppered them with tungsten fragments. But the missiles were coming from multiple directions, and the destroyer's firing solutions kept degrading as the ships pitched and rolled in 35-foot seas. At 0531 hours, the storm intensified dramatically. Melissa's northern outer rain bands, loaded with convective cells spawning waterspouts and generating 90-knot winds, slammed into the carrier group. Visibility dropped to 100 yards. Rain fell so heavily it sounded like gravel being poured on the ship's superstructures. The destroyers began taking green water over their bows. The Klub missiles didn't care. Their guidance systems, combining inertial navigation with radar homing, kept them on course. They were designed for exactly these conditions. Soviet engineers had built them to attack NATO carrier groups in the North Atlantic's terrible weather. 8 C-802 missiles closed from the southwest. USS Jason Dunham engaged with its 5-inch deck gun, firing radar-fused proximity rounds. One C-802 exploded. Another took shrapnel damage and veered off course, crashing into the sea. But 6 kept coming. At 05:34 hours, USS Arleigh Burke's Aegis finally got a clear track on a cluster of incoming missiles at 38 miles. The ship fired 4 SM-2 missiles in rapid succession, the launcher system working smoothly despite the violent ship motion. All 4 defensive missiles found targets. 3 Klub missiles and 1 C-802 disintegrated. But now the Venezuelan missiles were entering their terminal phase. 3 Klub missiles simultaneously executed their acceleration sequence, pitching up briefly before their supersonic sprint stages ignited. In seconds, they went from Mach 0.8 to Mach 2.9, screaming toward the Lincoln at nearly 2,000 miles per hour. The close-in weapon systems engaged. USS Monterey's phalanx radar picked up the incoming sprint stage Klub and began firing, the distinctive brrrt of the 20mm Gatling gun audible even over the storm. Tracers reached out through the rain. The missile took multiple hits, its warhead exploding 600 yards from the ship. The blast wave rattled the cruiser's superstructure and shrapnel pockmarked the hull, but the ship remained operational. 2 more sprint stage Klubs targeted Lincoln herself. The carrier's CRAM system launched a salvo of rolling airframe missiles, fire-and-forget weapons that homed on the Klub's radar emissions. 1 Venezuelan missile exploded 1,200 yards from the carrier. The other attempted an evasive maneuver, broke through the ram defense, and hit the sea 400 yards from Lincoln's port side. The missile's terminal dive had been too aggressive in the chaotic wind conditions. It impacted the water and detonated, sending a massive column of spray and fire into the air. The blast wave rocked the carrier, setting off alarms throughout the ship, but the hull remained intact. The aftermath that changed everything. At 05:47 hours, the engagement ended. The Lincoln carrier group had destroyed 23 of 26 Venezuelan missiles. 1 Termit missile flew erratically and ran out of fuel, crashing into the ocean. 2 C-802s continued past the carrier group, their guidance systems confused, until they too exhausted their fuel and fell into the sea. The material damage was minimal. USS Monterey had taken shrapnel damage, with 3 crew members suffering minor injuries. USS Arleigh Burke's radar array had sustained damage from debris, reducing its effectiveness by 15%. Lincoln had superficial hull damage from the near miss. No ships were sinking, no one had died. But the strategic damage was catastrophic. For every assumption the U.S. Navy had made about its invulnerability, Venezuela had fired 26 missiles at the most powerful naval force on Earth, and 3 had come within killing range of a supercarrier. In peacetime exercises, under ideal conditions, U.S. carrier defenses achieved near 100% kill rates against similar threats. But during Superstorm Melissa, in genuine combat conditions, the kill rate was 88%, high, but not high enough. The implications rippled through the Pentagon like a shockwave. If Venezuela could exploit weather to get missiles through the defenses, what could China do with hundreds of missiles launched during a typhoon? What about Iran using a sandstorm in the Persian Gulf, Russia coordinating with winter storms in the Arctic? Venezuela's challenge exposed a vulnerability that every near-peer adversary immediately recognized. American carriers weren't invincible. They were simply very well defended under most conditions. Change the conditions enough, and even third-rate powers could threaten them. The strategic revolution. The international response was carefully calibrated. The United States condemned Venezuela's reckless military exercises, but stopped short of calling it an attack. Venezuela maintained the fiction that the launches were defensive training, unfortunate timing, certainly, but not an act of war. Both sides stepped back from the brink because neither wanted the conflict to escalate. But in military academies from Beijing to Moscow to Tehran, a new doctrine was being written. The Venezuelan challenge, as it became known, proved that asymmetrical warfare could exploit environmental conditions to level the playing field. You didn't need to match American technology dollar for dollar. You needed timing, creativity, and the willingness to use nature itself as a force multiplier. Within 6 months, the U.S. Navy published revised doctrine for operating near hostile coastlines during severe weather. Standoff distances increased. New radar signal processing algorithms were developed to better filter sea clutter. Investment in all-weather sensors accelerated.
training scenarios began incorporating environmental degradation factors. The Lincoln Courier Group continued its patrol, although now maintaining significantly greater distance from the Venezuelan coast. Superstorm Melissa made landfall in western Jamaica as a Category 4 hurricane, causing catastrophic damage before dissipating over Central America. The storm claimed 1,847 lives and caused $43 billion in damage. But Melissa's most lasting impact wasn't the physical destruction, it was the military revolution she enabled. Venezuela had issued a challenge that echoed across the world. Even superpowers are vulnerable when nature joins the fight. In conference rooms and planning cells across the globe, military strategists were asking themselves a new question. What other aspects of weather, terrain, or natural phenomena could be weaponized? The Venezuelan challenge had opened a door that could never be closed again. And somewhere in the Caribbean, as the last remnants of Melissa dissipated and the waters calmed, the crews of the Lincoln Carrier Strike Group looked at their radar screens with new eyes. The next time they saw a hurricane forming, they would remember, nature isn't just a threat to avoid. For a clever enemy, it's an opportunity to exploit. The age of environmental warfare had arrived, written in the roiling chaos of a superstorm and the contrails of missiles that shouldn't have gotten through, but did.